You can get rich in crypto. You can also lose your shirt. Early investors can only get paid off with money from later investors. There's no other source of dollars.
Love and light, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of El Podcast, the greatest virtual happy hour in the world. I am your host, Kai Primo, and I'm joined by my fellow edutainers, El Capitan, Jesse Wright, and Alex Thomas, who is joining us all the way from New Orleans. All the way from London, our guest today is David Gerard. He is the author of the book Attack of the 50-Foot Blockchain and Libra Shrugged, How Facebook Tried to Take Over the Money. He is a technologist and a Unix system administrator and has been a crypto journalist since 2017. So this is going to be quite an exciting topic. We're going to have exciting opinions coming into the mix here. But what's up, everybody? It's happy hour. Who's excited and what's everybody drinking?
Water. Good evening, all.
I got the medalla since, we are in Puerto Rico, so.
The Puerto Rican champagne, as they call it. And David, what's new in London? What's going on in London these days?
Well, the government's collapsing, prices are going through the roof, there's going to be electricity outages in the winter, and we're enacting the entire J.G. Ballard collapse of civilization as the entire middle class goes insane and attack each other with axes in supermarkets fighting over toilet roll. We had a preview of this in March 2020 when the pandemic lockdown started, but I think we can really punch it through this time if we try.
Someone should create a movie. It sounds like an epic scene for the perfect horror film.
It's J.G. Ballard's world. We just live in it.
I hope everybody who's listening at home, please drink up. If you're not subscribed on YouTube, please do subscribe and also follow us on Spotify so you will never miss an amazing happy hour. David, tell us about yourself and when did you come across Bitcoin?
I think I first heard about Bitcoin in late 2010. I think when WikiLeaks was cut off from the credit card companies. And I went, they can't do that. They can do that. And someone said, oh, they could use Bitcoins. And what's Bitcoin? Oh, it's internet money. Fine. I heard about it a bit more in early 2011 when I went, oh, this is internet money made up by internet libertarians. I was very familiar with these people. Like, there's people who want less regulation, more freedoms, so forth, government out your face and so on. And then there's the extreme nutcases, and they're the ones you get on the internet. So I thought, right, this will be interesting. And around 2014, I discovered Reddit Buttcoin, which is a subreddit for making fun of Bitcoin and Bitcoiners and everything to do with it. Basically, if you understand that Bitcoin was created by internet libertarians, then you understand everything that has ensued in the many years since. So around 2016, I was chatting to my friend Elizabeth Sandifer, who writes books, and I said, I need some money. And she said, write a book. I said, sounds good. What about? She said, why Bitcoin is stupid. Make it about 15,000 words, spend a week, don't work too hard. So 9 months later, 55,000 words and 400 footnotes later, I had a book. And I thought this would sell about 300, but it came out in July 2017, just in time for the 2017 Bitcoin bubble. So it took off like a rocket, and it's now sold like about 15,000. So that's pretty good. And it's like started me on this second career as a cryptocurrency journalist or a finance journalist approach to cryptocurrency, which is sort of a job I didn't want, but it's landed on me and I get money for it, so fine. It's interesting and fun.
Following up on your intro, you found Bitcoin, wrote a book, and why it's stupid. I have a question then. Did you ever buy any Bitcoin as for your research, or have you always been a no-coiner?
Never. In 2014, I had 6 Dogecoins that I got from a Dogecoin faucet. And then I deleted those when I reformatted that laptop and couldn't be bothered. So, yeah, if I'd held on to those, they could be worth a whole dollar. but I missed out. So
Yeah, you missed out
don't think that I
missed out on a gold mine.
I don't feel that you somehow need to be into Bitcoin to write about it. Like, I can advise that perhaps skinny dipping in sewers is not good for your health without trying it out myself. Though that would add a certain gonzo journalism element to it, but I'm not going to do that. Like, basically, you can just approach this stuff as finance journalism, and because it is really.
No, that's a very good point, by the way. Could you simplify, so for me anyway, right? Or for the audience that may not know much about blockchain, can you simplify blockchain technology in layman's terms?
Certainly. So firstly, the technology doesn't matter. When someone says Bitcoin, or even when they say blockchain, or they say crypto or ICO or DeFi or NFT or any of these things, what they're saying is you can get rich for free. And how can you get rich for free? Because there's no such thing as a get-rich-quick scheme. Well, the answer is technology. Oh, well, that means must be technology then. The actual tech doesn't matter. Now, blockchain tech is really simple. It's like not hard at all. It's a ledger you can only add things to, and you have a mechanism for adding new things to the end. And that doesn't explain to you anything about why people do it, anything about the subculture around it, anything around what actually happens. You know, if you read the Bitcoin white paper, you won't understand the Bitcoin subculture. So the technology is just enough technology to prop up a set of financial instruments. And these all work on the principle of, I've made up a magic bean, if you buy it, you'll get rich for free. This promise obviously has a number of problems. Specifically, there's no such thing as a get-rich-quick scheme. Some people have made a bundle in crypto. You can totally make a bundle in crypto. You can get rich in crypto. You can also lose your shirt. You're a fair bit more likely to lose your shirt. Mathematically, more people will lose money than there is money made, because there is no source of dollars except incoming. Early investors can only get paid off with money from later investors. There's no other source of dollars because crypto has not worked as currency. Bitcoin aspired to be electronic peer-to-peer cash, but it tried really hard in the early 2010s. It never really worked out for that job, so all that's left was speculation. And we have like trading in zero-sum commodities where you have a winner and a loser. Like, there's regulations and rules and stuff around that. That's fine. So the answer to your question is that if you approach it as a technology first, you're missing the point. Because the tech is really quite simple and doesn't actually explain anything about how it works or what it's for. It's always a promise that you can somehow get magic money for free. Even enterprise blockchain is a promise that you can get organizational efficiency somehow for free. And that doesn't work either, which is why blockchain is always in the fabulous future in the enterprise.
You always hear in the news or YouTube, the media, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, you hear kind of like the buzzwords that they always use, like it's distributed and it's decentralized and that it's going to bank the unbank and that it gives power back to the people, and all these utopian scenarios they always lay out. And yet 75% of all transactions, specifically with Bitcoin, is among traders. So it seems like, I think maybe the original intent of Bitcoin had a lot of good ideas, but it's gone wrong? Or do you think that it's always kind of been flawed from the start?
The intent was sincere, and it's always been flawed from the start. As I said, it started with internet libertarians. Now, Bitcoin started with very sincere extreme libertarians, right? This is just the history of Bitcoin. They thought it was possible to have money that was completely divorced from the interactions of governments. Basically, they wanted to have the concept of money and wealth without being responsible to society. Now, here in the world, money is a social function. Bitcoin was an attempt by people who believed some weird and wrong economic ideas. a version of the gold standard, which we went off in the 30s because it wasn't working anymore. When we had solid gold standard economics, world economies had massive booms and busts, and there was too much economic activity for all the gold to back all the money. So eventually they just went, right, we're just going to have money be fiat. Now we're going to have monetary policy. We'll create and destroy money as we need to. The current system has a lot of problems, but it worked better than the system that came before it. The whole gold standard idea comes from people who want to go backwards. It's the variety of pseudoscience where you take an idea that's obsolete and you say, actually, that bad idea is a good idea again, and try to make it work. And Bitcoin was literally an attempt to make this in a technological form. It was money with a given political aim. This is what I mean about how this stuff isn't in the Bitcoin white paper. It doesn't set out the economic plan. Satoshi made his views very clear later on. Like the Bitcoin 0.1 release notes have this whole chunk in the section that's basically central banker conspiracy theories. And he's talked about how he wanted the libertarians in Bitcoin to do the sort of promotion of Bitcoin because they were much better at it than he would be. But that was very much what Bitcoin was for. And of course, it started with a lot of very sincere libertarians. Like these guys they're not liars. They're not frauds or anything. They're not trying to rip anyone off. They're very sincere. As a sideline, when the country of El Salvador adopted Bitcoin in 2021, a lot of the old Bitcoin libertarians looked at what they was doing and said, no, this is wrong. They're trying to force it on people and they should not be doing that. And actually, this guy's a dictator. And they were not happy at all. So that was quite heartening to see. Or when Bitcoin mining was mostly happening in China and Xinjiang, and they were using forced labor in the coal mines that fueled the cheap Bitcoin mining, a lot of these guys were not happy about that because they don't like dictators and authoritarians. So you can't say that's wrong. They're sincere, good people. What happened then was Bitcoin built up for a couple of years, and then around 2011, the Mt. Gox Bitcoin exchange started. You could reasonably reliably change Bitcoins into money and back and forth. Send the money via PayPal and you could get some Bitcoins, or pay you out via PayPal. At that point, Bitcoin had a price. And what happened in 2011 then, as soon as there was money involved, the scammers came flocking in, right? So Bitcoin wasn't started as a scam, but it rapidly became a platform for scammers. Now, a lot of these guys were previous crooks, mail fraud and all sorts of things. And they saw these naive people who were building their own economy from scratch and who didn't know history or economics or anything like that, and they saw fresh meat. And unfortunately, anyone in crypto will tell you it's still full of scammers. There's a lot of reasons for that. Bitcoin is irreversible. Transactions in crypto in general are irreversible. That was a design feature because the threat model of Bitcoin was the government might take your money. That was absolutely a design feature, was that transactions were irreversible. One of the reasons that Bitcoin doesn't work as cash, and why crypto hasn't worked as cash, is because that's the opposite of what consumers want. You know, if you come up with a new payment method, people are very particular about their money. You know, they want reversibility. Some people don't want reversibility. The pitch was that merchants hate chargebacks, and they do. If you know small business people who take credit cards, you can probably get half an hour of ranting out of them about chargebacks, because it sucks. And if you get too many chargebacks, the credit card company dumps you. But the thing that merchants hate more than chargebacks is people not spending their money with them. And that's why they accept credit cards in the first place. If you introduce a new payment method, it's got to have customer service, possibility of chargebacks, fraud and thefts and mistakes being fixed. You've got to have that stuff, otherwise people won't accept it. So Bitcoin didn't really work out as a way for people to buy stuff. It only worked out in channels where people couldn't get good payment methods, like they couldn't use dollars or they couldn't use ordinary payment channels. So what was the first Bitcoin use case? Buying drugs on the Silk Road.
You obviously wouldn't want to have chargebacks when you're dealing in drugs or other illicit goods. It's kind of the perfect currency for a market like Silk Road.
So it turned out to be a bit more complicated than that. I mean, the more neutral description is things your government doesn't want you to buy. We can all think of stuff we might want to buy that our government might get tetchy about. And the governments are annoying and get in your face, and it's stupid and annoying. So fine. But it was interesting as a study of a completely unregulated black market. They sort of evolved all sorts of things, like putting money into escrow and stuff to make sure a deal went through. There was a lot of trouble on there because the Bitcoin price was volatile, just like it is now. And it would be volatile enough that over the course of a few days, it might mess up a deal. And drug dealers are not known for their patience. So this caused a lot of problems. And basically, they really hated using Bitcoin as money, but they used it because they couldn't use real dollars because they'd get busted. So yeah, it was an interesting study. And this goes on into darknet markets to these days. They mostly don't use Bitcoin now because Bitcoin turns out to be completely traceable. And if you're going to do crimes, then doing them on a permanent public ledger of all transactions doesn't work out well for you. They tend to use coins like Monero, which is much less traceable. But the same problems still crop up.
I want to quickly say that people will sometimes argue that it is a new industry and a new tech, and so nothing's been figured out. And also people liken the birth of this new industry, new technology to the birth of the internet, and where a lot of scammers also came about. And, it's a wild, wild west. It's brand new, et cetera, et cetera. Does it have a chance to actually provide value or solve problems?
People say all sorts of things and will make any excuse.
Well, the internet's still here.
None of the financial instruments that are constructed using crypto are actually very new. There are basically no new financial instruments and there's no new scams either. The comparison to the internet, I get this from people on Twitter who tell me all about what the internet was like in 1993 when I was using it and they weren't born yet. And it's never not amazing. And it's always very, very stupid because the internet had clear use cases from day one. I think it was 1964 when they first constructed the first pre-internet computer networking, the stuff that would become the internet. They were using it for real work. They added more functions with time as it got faster, but they knew what they were going for. Social media was predicted in 1909 in The Machine Stops by E.M. Forster. Science fiction through the 20th century would often talk about a worldwide computer network where people could talk to each other. None of this was new ideas. Also, the comparison needs justification itself. Coin is like, let's pick a technology. Let's randomly pick the greatest revolution in communication since the radio. You need to justify picking that one as your comparison. The short answer is, it's not like the internet, don't be stupid. But it's also this idea that technologies evolve to a conclusion, that technologies will naturally just grow and succeed. And you can always say it's the early days about any technology that doesn't seem to be doing a lot. And that's false too. Most technologies go nowhere. Most technologies fail. Most new ideas aren't actually good and don't succeed. You'd have to have some justification to say, yes, this one is comparable to this great winner. Also, this is always raised as an excuse for failure. You say, look, this crypto stuff doesn't do a lot except speculation. They always say, but it's like the early internet. It's always an excuse for failure. Or, it's like the Gartner hype cycle. We're just in the trough of disillusionment at the moment. The Gartner hype cycle is rubbish too. It's this sort of teleological view of technology that always progresses to success. And that's wrong. It's obviously wrong. Crypto is a collection of financial instruments and just enough technology to implement the financial instruments. Like ICO offerings in the 2017-2018 era turned into DeFi when they worked out how to trade any token against any other token. Under US law, basically 100% of these things are going to be unregistered penny stock offerings. The one technological difference crypto makes is you can basically spam the regulators with so many violations they can't keep up. Like there's something like 7,000 equity stocks in the US, like stocks you can trade on stock exchanges, all the pink sheets are over the counter or whatever. There's somewhere north of 1 million, I think, tokens on the various blockchains. And they're basically all unregistered penny stocks, over 99%, because they were invented so people could make money trading them. And in theory, they come under regulation. In practice, the regulators have a hell of a time just even keeping up. The way they've dealt with this is basically say, right, you're a huge trash fire. As long as you've got the huge trash fire over there, well, that's okay-ish. And like crypto just had a huge collapse a few months ago. The whole market just crashed horribly. Basically, there's complicated reasons for that, but the one sentence explanation is they did a small 2008 financial crisis, except it was just in crypto. And a bunch of over-leveraged companies managed to blow out the whole thing. This didn't affect the wider economy. It was amazingly disconnected from the wider economy of where people live and work and do things, and even the rest of finance really wasn't very affected. Like, if the NASDAQ goes down, Bitcoin goes down, but Bitcoin's movements don't seem to carry back into the rest of the economy. I talk to traders as well, DeFi guys. They're the people who call themselves degens. They know it's a trash fire. They know there's a meltdown on a weekly basis. They like their trash fire. It keeps them warm and comfortable. And you can't say they don't understand the risks. Fair enough. But the trouble with trash fires is they spread. So the trash fire of DeFi spread and took out what CeFi, centralized DeFi lenders like Celsius and Voyager are the names that are in the headlines. And the fact those names are in the headlines, that's a big problem for crypto, because it means the regulators really, really are interested in looking now. I think there's 40 different state regulators currently chasing the corpse of Celsius, for example. What they did was they traded the DeFi markets, then sold that as a product to ordinary investors. Now, in crypto, there's a thing where when people lose all their money, they go, oh, well, I wasn't good enough, and they sort of go away. When ordinary mum and dad investors, they lose their money, they yell. They do not shut up. And the regulators and the governments hear them, and they go, that looks like it was an investment offering. We better look into this. And,
there is a large population of adults in the world who are underbanked, right? And these people do have the potential to contribute to grow economies in developing countries if given access to financial tools that they don't have, right? So does this industry have the potential to find solutions and assist creating financial access to the underbanked? Because if it has a chance, then why not let people build?
So the word potential is great because it's really hard to disprove a negative. Can you say, but maybe it has the potential to do something better? So I'd say no. And I actually tracked down this question. I know that crypto guys were thinking, wow, we've got a new financial instrument. Maybe we can bank the unbanked. Keep in mind, bank the unbanked is an artificial problem. It's a problem that was invented because at some point, people who were well off and comfortable decided, I've got a bank account. Everyone should have a bank account. In fact, you should have a bank account to live in society. That was new because before that, a lot of people didn't. They used cash. And suddenly we've created this problem where people can't need a bank account to live and they can't get a bank account because we don't let them have a bank account. And obviously the reason must be that they're dissolute poors and not that someone made up a problem and inflicted it on them. But we have the problem now. So banking the unbanked is a common term in international development discourse, as you outline. Bitcoin adopted it big time around 2013. And the thing was, all they did was say, we'll bank the unbanked. How will you do that? Well, they can use Bitcoin. How do they use Bitcoin? Well, and there was never a coherent plan at any point. This particularly came up when Facebook tried doing their Libra cryptocurrency. I've got a whole chapter in the book about this, in the Libra book. They never put forward a plan either. Like, you'd expect them to do their working. They never put forward any plan for this. So there are various barriers to getting a bank account. One of the biggest ones is they don't have any money. Or They need too much identification they can't get hold of to get a bank account. In a lot of European countries, there are laws that banks must offer a basic bank account with no fees to anyone who has sufficient identification. The US doesn't have that. You might not be able to get a bank account. If you do get one and you lose it for any reason, like the bank just decides you're too annoying as a customer, you might be able to get another one. The solution to that isn't to come up with a technology and claim it'll do the job. The solution is legislation. When Facebook promoted Libra, they were promoting all the great things you could do if only you had their cryptocurrency. You could go on buses with a wave of your phone, or buy your coffee with a wave of your phone, or other exciting things that we've had for 10 years. It was like they looked out the window of their office in Menlo Park and just decided, yes, this is what literally the whole world needs. Did they ask anyone? No. When they actually say banking the unbanked, what it tends to mean in practice is money launderers, like crooks who can't get banking. Crypto serves that job to some extent, but for the billions of people without bank accounts, it's not something that would do that job.
That's definitely an interesting take. I'm thinking about the ability to take out loans, to start small businesses.
If you were setting up a banking industry and you were using Bitcoin instead of dollars, you'd be setting up a banking industry. You know, having some tokens on a blockchain doesn't make the entire infrastructure come into place. My favorite example is M-Pesa in Kenya. Safaricom, which is the local branch of Vodafone, have a system where you can send a text message. You put in money at a Safaricom shop, they send a text message to your recipient, they take it to another Safaricom shop, and they get some money. Transmission of money by mobile phone. This came about by historical accident, but it's hugely popular to this day. And rather than adopt technology like blockchains or bank accounts, they looked at something that would serve people's needs and did. But the other thing about that is M-Pesa sounds simple, but that required a huge, complicated back end. You had to set it up so the shops worked okay, so as to avoid thefts, corruption, make sure everyone was paid, make sure regulations were obeyed, make sure it didn't become a haven for crooks. I have this hypothesis that basically any payment system that's really easy for people to use has a super complicated back end. And any payment system that has a simple back end is going to be really, really complicated and brittle to use for the user. I should accumulate data on that, but I'm pretty sure that that's how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. David, I appreciate your opinions on this. And there are definitely problems with crypto, but not being involved in the space and having such strong opinions about it really loses credibility for me, because there's optimists that are trying to change the financial system, give power to the people, and it is evolving. And there's always going to be pessimists that stand on the outside that aren't involved. And it's like saying that government is corrupt and you shouldn't be involved, instead of being a political activist and getting involved and doing something about it. I think some of the points that you've raised are being solved right now. For example, you talked about a Ponzi-nomic structure. And DeFi has actually moved to something called real yield, where they're not using tokens to be able to pay people, which is inflationary and eventually falls apart on itself. And that's the thing. Crypto is evolving the same way that the stock market did. The stock market was unregulated. It was done in bucket shops. There was a lot of scammers. And then once it was figured out what these behaviors were, it became regulated, and it actually has been an amazing asset class and driven the economy. So if you are future oriented, you're seeing that this is actually moving to a place where it is going to be integrated into society. But if you're past oriented and looking at something that's evolving, it's easy to pick apart. One of the things I'm most excited about in crypto is not actually only the financial aspects, but there's a movement for Gov3, where you use the blockchain to be able to record votes that cannot be changed. And this is a type of democracy and freedom that people should have the power of. And as we've seen with issues in politics nowadays, this is something that could be world changing. And so to say that the technology doesn't matter is really looking at it from such a narrow lens that you're missing the broader impact that it's making.
Sure, it's hard to argue possibilities and say that philosophically something could never happen. But I think your stock market example is actually an important one to examine more closely, because you speak as though the stock market just happened, just calmly evolved to a state of regulation. That isn't quite how the history went. What actually happened was in the 20s, the stock market was going wild, the roaring 20s. A bunch of people were making a ton of money. A lot of people weren't making money. A lot of people lost their shirts. It was highly unregulated. I mean, the standard book on this is Reminiscences of a Stock Operator, which is a great book everyone should read. Everyone in crypto, or even looking at crypto, should read this book.
It is the first book I read. It's a great book. He lost his life awesome. At the end, but yeah, it is.
The awesome. Guy, he would have been into crypto. He would have been one of the degens. He would have said, "I'm a degen and proud of it." But what happened was they partied so hard they broke the economy. The Black Friday crash of 1929, which led into the Great Depression. The SEC was set up because the general public was at the gates with pitchforks and torches. There was a lot of stuff going on at that time. At one point, it was looking like private banking would not be allowed to exist in the US. The Glass-Steagall Act was actually put into place by Glass and Steagall, who were two great promoters of let people do what they want, economic freedom for business and banks and so on. That was their compromise, separate investment banking from retail banking. The SEC was founded so that people would be allowed to do joint stock operating companies. It basically took a nation-shattering disaster for people to realize that the regulation was needed. So we have an analogy in the recent crypto collapse where people partied so hard they broke all of crypto. The regulators are looking at this extremely closely and with an acerbic eye. I commend to the recent report from the Financial Stability Oversight Council, which is part of the US Treasury. There's a whole section where they spent about 10 pages dissecting the downfall of Terra Luna and the downfall of 3AC and the consequences of it. If you want regulatory clarity, that's them preparing to give crypto a lot of regulatory clarity. And they're trying to work out how to regulate this thing so it does not end up in another disaster. The trouble being that trash fires spread. So it's possible that something more regulatable will emerge from this. As for the other possibilities, there's all sorts of possibilities to do things, but it'll often founder on the details. Like voting on the blockchain isn't something that any country actually needs. I've seen this float as the blockchain use case, and all the people who float this case, it's like they've never been outside the US. You don't need voting machines. Actually, you can do the whole thing on paper. I'm from Australia. The way we solved voting and registration in Australia was we made voting compulsory. Now that sounds sort of weird and oppressive. In practice, it's not very. Like there's a fine of $50 and you can make an excuse if you didn't vote. Most people just see it as their duty to go out and vote. But what that means is the government works extremely hard to make sure every single adult with a over 18 is registered to vote. And then they do all the votes on paper. And they're done by neutral public servants, not by partisan groups, where any citizen can come in and watch the vote being conducted. The system works really well, and the Australian Electoral Commission sells their services to other countries. And, you know, blockchain doesn't solve any of the hard parts, which is, do people have faith in the system, which turns out to be the hardest part. Maybe a system could emerge that people understand intuitively and comprehend and want to work in. I think that having people understand it and have faith in it will be the hard part. People understand paper. And that sounds like a very basic, simple level, but then we're talking about literally the whole population. So yeah, it's got to be basic and simple. Australia is a good example. You can do a democracy, have votes that are close, but people respect them, and it works. I can't disprove future possibilities, and I'm not going to even try to disprove future possibilities. But what I will say is, if something's had a long history of disasters and repeatedly ending up with big ideas that just turn out to be avenues of speculation in practice, then I think that that's obviously the hazard that the big ideas are going to have to account for. I've had this sort of caution talking to NFT people. The NFT market as it existed through 2021 was an abomination. It was horrible. It was awful. It's died and it deserved to. It sucked. But there were actually artists trying to do arty things in it. I'm a big fan of conceptual art. The idea of when you buy something, you're buying an experience. Sure, that's great. The whole music industry runs on selling experiences, for example. Are you buying the experience of being in an artwork? That's cool. And that's fun. And the trouble is all the cool stuff was basically blotted out by crypto traders trading NFTs as assets on OpenSea. And with that being more or less dead, maybe they can do some more potential stuff. So any further uses for crypto are going to have to contend with the question of how does this not just turn into a speculation trash fire? That's a question they have to ask. Answer.
Yeah, let me answer that. So one of the best use cases just happened recently with Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine lost their economy, and there was no way for people to get funds into Ukraine.
That's
and they were able
entirely false. They were able to be paid through the banking system quite well. They just opened crypto as another way to give them money. There was no problem with other channels.
But assets did go into Ukraine. And then the people of Russia, they lost their economy by the US government. It was a takeover, and they weren't able to actually survive. And the people of Russia are not the issue. It was the government and the military was the issue, but they were the ones suffering. And they were able to still have the freedom through the use case of blockchain technology to be able to continue to survive. So to say that there's no use case besides speculation and trading, that is false.
Oh,
because
sure.
We just saw,
as I already said, doing the use case for crypto in practice has always been evading regulation, doing things that governments don't want you to. Now, some regulation is terrible. And it's bad, and it's just annoying. Most regulations exist for a reason, but absolutely. Making payments that are hard to make for other ways is, that's the use case. Like with the Silk Road, I was like, fine, go have fun. The drug war is a failure. That's not an uncommon opinion. There's a payment use case, of course there is.
But what I really would like to say is it's good to be able to point out the problems because these things have to be solved. One of the biggest problems that I see is they started to make it so it was anonymous and people had their own privacy, but this was a breeding ground for scammers. And that anonymity is a major problem where people can launch a coin for $400, make millions, and then skate off absolutely free.
Exactly.
Some of the ways that it was designed have actually turned out to be negative. I am new to crypto and I came in seeing the problems. And what I've seen is a lot of people are very proud of it, but there's ways that it was designed that are flawed, and it absolutely has to change at a fundamental level for it to be useful for the common person. I think a lot of people in crypto don't want to look at that. Fundamentally, it's flawed in many ways. So I do agree with you.
Consumers want reversibility. They want a great big service who will do the job for them. Approximately nobody wants to be their own bank. Why the hell would I want to be my own bank? I have a bank for that. I'm with NatWest. I pay them fees. Their fees are on the high side of average. But you know what? I get a lot of customer service from it. And it's civilization works on division of labor. I pay someone else to do the work for me. Now, I want to have the freedom to do stuff myself, but money is a social function. What is $1 worth? It's worth what the US government will back it. Dollars are extremely popular outside the US, but they wouldn't be nearly as popular if, say, the US government did in fact collapse at some point. Money is a social function. And you can't get away from it being a social function.
Let's talk about wealth distribution. Jesse, I believe, has it pulled up some stats on wealth distribution of Bitcoin and a lot of cryptocurrencies for that matter.
This article was published in the December 2021 issue of Frontier of Blockchain, and it says that 0.01% of the Bitcoin wallets account for 58.21% of the wealth, under 7,000 wallets. Dogecoin, 7 wallets have 44.20% of the wealth, which represents 0.00078, and Ethereum, 0.0049% of the addresses are responsible for 76.17% of the wealth, which represents 2,270 addresses.
blockchain analysis of the Bitcoin market by the London School of Economics and MIT Sloan. This one's interesting. This one says that the Bitcoin mining capacity is highly concentrated and has been for the last 5 years. The top 10% of miners control 90%, and just 0.1% control close to 50% of mining capacity. So where's the decentralization in all of this? And where's the power back to the people come in play here? So I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Well, the answer is that Bitcoin has been re-centralized since about 2014. Like, it just has. Operationally, it's not decentralized at all. 3 or 4 miners have always controlled a majority of the mining. The early years of Bitcoin, up to about 2014, the 51% attack was the apocalypse scenario for Bitcoin. If anyone ever achieved 51% of mining, that was it. That was game over. Bitcoin was dead. This was talked about a lot. And then in 2014, one mining pool, Ghash, went over 51%. Everyone sort of pretended nothing had happened. Ghash broke up into multiple pools, and everyone just went, it's fine now, because they were too busy trading Bitcoin. And then the incentive not to re-centralize was you don't want to break the Bitcoin market, which has held up so far. 1, we don't know who owns all these different pools, and 2, we also know all the miners know each other. Like 2015, 80% of the men who controlled 80% of Bitcoin mining all stood up on the same stage together. Decentralized is a buzzword. It sounds really cool. The point of decentralization was legal. It was to make sure that governments could not pressure an entity into doing transactions in a particular way. But operationally, that hasn't been true since 2014. Legally, it's still sort of true, but yeah. Ethereum has been even more centralized in its mining. In practice, almost 100% of Ethereum transactions that do anything have gone through an API called Infura, which is run by Consensus, which was founded by Joe Lubin, one of the Ethereum founders. And you can theoretically use a different API or no API at all. You can just program directly against the Ethereum blockchain port 30303 if you're enough of a geek, and nobody does. Everyone uses Infura. To the point where in March, because Infura is a US entity, so they had to enact sanctions against Russia when Russia invaded Ukraine. And they accidentally blocked too much of the world. People in Venezuela, suddenly they couldn't trade Ethereum at all. They went, has Ethereum broken? No, it was just Infura. Once you know the problem, you can work around it. But like 10 years ago, people who used Bitcoin, they might know what cryptography was. They might know some of the technical details were involved. In 2022, nobody does. Approximately nobody remaining knows how the guts of it work. They just know it's technology and it's cool and you can make money doing this, which is the thing they've been told. Ethereum is basically centralized. And a thing I saw yesterday, there was a big controversy in Ethereum where the Office of Foreign Asset Control sanctioned an Ethereum mixer called Tornado Cash because North Korea was cashing out hundreds of millions of dollars of Ether via Tornado Cash, and they're the enemy. So the national defense institutions came up against that. And they went, right, we're sanctioning Tornado Cash. It's important to remember, crypto treats this like it's a financial regulation. It's not. It's national defense. And so disliking the US war machine is a reasonable political position to hold, but I think going head on against it, you probably won't work out and you need to plan a bit better if you're going to act against it. There was a lot of protest in the Ethereum sphere against this because they didn't want to censor transactions, the worst thing in the world. But in practice, everyone wants to be able to cash out their Ether at Coinbase, and everyone wants to do their DeFi using USDC. And those are both US entities. So, of course, they were going to not pass on sanctioned transactions. And as of yesterday, I think 99 to 100% of blocks on Ethereum are compliant with the sanctions. So Tornado Cash transactions just can't get through at all anymore. Government controls turn out they work sometimes, whether you want them to or not. So decentralization has always been a buzzword. In practice, there's a lot of central entities. everything blockchain has central entities who are touchable. And it's a question of whether the government has gotten around to touching them. Like, no one has told Bitcoin miners to sanction entities as yet, but I think that's only because North Korea hasn't abused it or whatever.
What were your thoughts on the most recent Ethereum merge?
Well done to them on a very, very difficult IT project. I can really appreciate that sort of thing because that's what I do for a living, difficult IT projects. They had to do a lot of complicated stuff and make it work right the first time. I don't want to go overboard in congratulating them for getting off proof of work mining because they did it for 7 years when they could have just not done that. I'm glad they stopped doing the dumb thing that used a whole country's worth of electricity for no actual purpose, given that decentralization has always been fake operationally. And now they've stopped doing that, so good. It's one less argument against NFTs, for example. Now the main argument against NFTs is that the most obnoxious crypto bros still suck, as anyone in crypto will tell you. It's good they stopped doing the bad thing. Well done.
Okay.
I don't want to congratulate them too hard. I mean, the worst thing was that that didn't actually cut the energy consumption to zero. What happened was there were all these Ethereum mining data centers that suddenly couldn't mine Ether anymore. So they got Bitcoin mining in and used that instead. And so instead of cutting the power by 99%, it cut it to about 35% of what it was, which is better. And you could say that's not technically Ethereum doing it anymore, but they set up the conditions for that to happen, and it was completely predictable. And that's going to slowly cut down, I guess, but only as Bitcoin mining decreases, which depends on the Bitcoin price.
Who do you think Satoshi is? I know in your book you clearly say it's not Craig Wright, which I would agree, but
no.
One of my theories is that it could be a government entity. The SHA-256 algorithm, which is the cryptographic hash function that is part of the BTC protocol, was created by the NSA in 2001. Tor was created by the U.S. Naval Academy in the mid-90s. One of my theories is that Bitcoin is a Trojan horse to usher in an era of central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs.
I don't think either of those is the case. The thing that Bitcoin does, the trick where you can have a digital currency without a central controlling entity, they were wanting that since the 80s. Not government entities, but the serious, hardcore, extreme libertarians who were wanting to build this sort of thing. They've been trying to build it for 2 decades before Bitcoin emerged. There's no new technologies in Bitcoin. This is important. Satoshi never claimed to have invented new stuff. It's an innovation, but it was an innovation built from old parts. Like the newest part was SHA-256, which was 2001. I think it looks very like a project done at home by someone who really wanted a thing that worked this way. I don't know who Satoshi is. I don't have a theory. I don't think any of the names are actually good prospects. Any of the common names. There's no reason to assume it's someone we know. I think it will stay a mystery. I think it's pretty clear he disappeared around 2011 and isn't coming back.
You don't think in, say, 20 years from now, every country will have a CBDC and that they can just turn your money on or off, or have it linked up to your EV, so if you don't make your car payment, they just shut your car off?
It might be, but it won't be because of Bitcoin as such. I mean, CBDCs, a lot of these issues were first being discussed about just electronic money in the 1990s. Again, there's a chapter in the Libra Shrugged book talking specifically about the history of CBDCs. The idea was first mapped out by Jean-Paul Koning, who's a blogger about Bitcoin who everyone should read everything by. A lot of the ideas in Bitcoin, he came up with the ideas first. Execution is everything, but credit to him for the ideas. He came up with the idea of FedCoin, where you have something like Bitcoin, but without it being money. It could just be coins issued by the Federal Reserve, and they could create or destroy them as they needed, and those coins would be worth $1. And so it was basically the CBDC idea. Now, central bank research departments, they come up with wild ideas all the time. They basically write science fiction about money. That's their job. They have to come up with wild ideas just in case the wild ideas happen, because the central bank's job is stability. Because when the money goes bad, people get upset. So they want things to be stable. This leads to a lot of conflict over central banks. They're public institutions whose job is to keep the money stable. So they have to plan for weird stuff happening. And those guys are fascinated by Bitcoin. You'll never hear a central banker say that something couldn't possibly turn the world upside down, because possibilities happen. So they liked the idea of a central bank digital currency, but it was never going to be an unregulated entity like Bitcoin. It's always going to have control, as you describe. But we have a central entity. It's called the central bank. So ultimately you get to a system where you might as well just use a database. There's been attempts at central bank digital currencies where the money is on your phone and it will work offline, like where you can transmit phone to phone by Bluetooth or whatever. I don't believe any of those have actually managed that functionality yet. So that's a tricky one. Like, I can think of cases where CBDCs literally have a use case, right? My favorite is the Bahamas sand dollar, where you have the Bahamas. It's a country that's made up of an archipelago of islands. They have a lot of poor people, but everyone's got a phone. And even quite poor people have a smartphone, even if an old one. And also you have a lot of trouble with access being cut off in case of stormy weather or whatever. So they wanted to have a system that people could use on their phone that would be dollars, Bahamas dollars, which are pegged to US dollars. And they wanted that system in place. Basically, they came up with the use case. Then they thought the commercial banks aren't doing this, because a lot of outer islands weren't served by commercial banks, because they went, there's not enough business there, can't be bothered. So the central bank had to step in. But they don't want to do retail. They don't want to do customer service, because that's not what they're good at. That's what the retail banks are good at. So they've got this system. It works. It's interesting. It's getting some uses. And the big problem with CBDCs is finding use cases. It's very particular circumstances in the Bahamas. That condition doesn't necessarily apply in the US. The Federal Reserve is not actually very keen on doing a CBDC. A lot of the pressure comes from legislators who've been talking to Bitcoin promoters, who think CBDC, buzzword, cool thing, we need this. And again, because US consumer banking is a bit behind the rest of the world. It should catch up a bit in maybe next year or the year after, when the FedNow system comes in, a real-time gross settlement system for retail banking. They have that in Europe with SEPA for the euro. We have it in the UK for the pound. It's called faster payments. Works really well. I can send you pounds in seconds. It's a fiddly pain on the backside. I have to put a bank account number and stuff, but you can do it. So a system like that will go into place. It'll be as if Zelle was accessible to everyone in the country, right? Instant, free, really good. So that'll do that job. Now they're testing it out thoroughly because it's got to work first time, because people are particular about their money, but it's looking good so far. And if that's in place, they probably won't have a US use case for a CBDC. The EU is pushing for a CBDC, and they still haven't come up with an actual use case for it. So I don't know what they're doing. China's ECNY, it's called. CNY is the currency, the Chinese yuan, the renminbi. That was done by their central bank, their blockchain research unit. Again, people research things. The People's Bank of China is not only the central bank, it's the financial regulator as well. So it's huge. And of course, China is 1 billion people. Everything in China is at scale. And they had this idea floating around as white papers inside their department. Then Facebook said, we're going to do the Libra. And China went, we're not letting you get away with that. We'll do our own. It was entirely, they were motivated by Facebook and the threat of Facebook's Libra taking away their currency. Now they've come up with this electronic payment system. And it works and people use it. And that's fine, but it doesn't offer you anything that they didn't already have with Alipay and TenPay, which are the existing systems. What it does offer is compatibility, because those systems weren't compatible. But ECNY works on both of them. So it'll be an incremental advance. It won't be a new sort of thing. And the way they're approaching privacy issues with ECNY is Small transactions they don't care about. Large transactions they care about. Much as we do now with cash. Say I go down to a nightclub and I spend £10 on an ecstasy tablet. This is an illegal transaction. But broadly speaking, I'm probably not going to lose my bank account over it. If I go and rock up with a duffel bag full of cash and pay £10,000 for lots of ecstasy tablets, I'm a crook and I'm going to get caught and go to jail. Small transactions get by, large ones don't. That's a regulatory decision they made. That's not intrinsic to any of these systems. There's a lot of bureaucrats who dream of controlling the Eye of Sauron and looking into your financial heart and seeing everything. They think that'd be really cool. Obviously, there's objections to this idea from everyone. You don't need blockchains for this at any point. So all of this is a matter of regulation, what society will put up with, politics. It's all politics at the bottom. What the blockchain did and what Bitcoin did was give them the idea and get them thinking along these lines and how it would work. But the systems with a blockchain in tend not to work very well. One system, Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, their Dcash system, it stopped working entirely in January for 2 months because it turned out a certificate in their copy of Hyperledger had expired and nobody could work out how to fix it. Like, just imagine if the money stops working because someone couldn't upgrade the software. That would not be acceptable. Dcash was still in testing. So they said, oh, it's just in testing and not this is a disastrous piece of garbage that doesn't work. I think actually it's the disastrous piece of garbage that doesn't work. And they're going to have to install a much more central system if they want it to work properly. But they're keeping going with their system. So we'll see how it works out. My key point about this is none of this is about the technology. It's all about the politics of who gets to do what and oversee what and so on. And what people will put up with, what bureaucrats want and what they should be allowed to have and so on. It's all politics all the way down because money is politics. Money is deeply political.
Yeah. Would you say that that's the same reason why institutional investors are also coming in?
To the extent they're coming in.
We have major partnerships, big tech, really spending a tremendous amount of money in the metaverse. Facebook, I just read they're about to lay off close to 12,000 people now to keep putting money into the metaverse.
Yeah, my theory of the metaverse is that Mark Zuckerberg ran out of ideas years ago and now he's just on crack. I think that completely explains the metaverse. We've got Second Life and you see all these journalists write about the metaverse and it's like, do you remember Second Life 15 years ago? And some of these guys, I'm pretty sure they were writing about Second Life at the time. It's like, obviously Second Life doesn't exist because otherwise all this metaverse hype would just be stupid. And I think a lot of it is just the drive to try to sell crypto tokens. Even the staff won't use the meta platform.
All right. Yeah, David, so you've clearly identified some of the problems with cryptocurrency and blockchain. What do you see as a way forward, or if you were things that you would like to change about it, and what would be the solutions for crypto and kind of a message to the community to do something better for society?
I said a few years ago, the future of crypto is that it will become a financial instrument for people who are thoroughly part of the system. I think that's coming true. I think basically this is an investment asset. It will become increasingly more regulated. As long as you can make DeFi tokens, there'll be people doing stuff outside the Eye of Sauron. My ethical and moral concern has always been when ordinary people get ripped off, which happens a lot. And that's reprehensible and those people need to be busted. Like, I'm very pleased, for example, at the news that there's 40 state investigators after Celsius, and I did a securities regulator conference last month, and they were saying, yeah, I really want to put Alex Mashinsky in jail. And obviously there's a lot of steps between Celsius exists and Mashinsky goes to jail. There's a lot of paperwork along the way, and they've got to get all the paperwork correct. But the fact they were saying this, and it's not a secret, multiple state people independently said this. I think that's good because, need to bust a few more crooks. If crypto can get over its loathing of the concept of regulation, because the regulators are just really unhappy right now, and they're going to win. Again, I commend to you the FSOC report on crypto. There's a whole section about 3AC and Terra Luna, for example. Their concern is not so much about people being ripped off, it's about stability of the whole financial system. We need consumer education. Consumers have never been educated. I mean, there's an argument that I would not stop people from buying cryptos. Like, I don't think you can stop people from buying cryptos. Ultimately, if you want to buy some ether, you're going to do it. And I do think there's an argument that people should be free to blow their money on garbage if they want to. If I think it's trash, that doesn't matter. If you want to buy it, you want to buy it. I do think you have to account for the fact there are literally predators in the space predating on these people, and the predators have to be stopped. So I want to see more scammers busted. I think that's going to be necessary before crypto is seen as anything other than a hive of scum and villainy. I think that's got to happen.
In your opinion, can Bitcoin and crypto go to zero? What would happen if it did?
You know, I predict Bitcoin will be around for decades, because all you need is the software, the blockchain, and 2 or more enthusiasts. They'll be swapping Bitcoins between each other if no one else uses it. How much it hooks into the existing financial system, that's a completely separate question. I'm not sure what will happen. Bitcoin will be here for decades. How much it hooks into the financial system, that's a question for the financial system. My main point of regulation is, overwhelmingly, people are into crypto for the money. Like, we just had an economic asset bubble. People get in it for the money. And if you want to get into the world of real money, you have to follow the rules of real money. That's not a controversial position to anyone outside crypto, and it needs to become less of a controversial position inside crypto. Many crypto people accept this. They want to be workers, members of the system. They want less regulation. They fight to have less regulation on certain things, and they do so in the proper manner. The absolutely wild nuts stuff is, I guess it's going to keep happening, but I think that's the problem, and it has to be sort of cleaned up a bit. I don't know how to clean it up, but it's got to happen somehow, or it will be forced on people.
Yeah, I would like to jump in and kind of share what I see as the solution for crypto. I agree with what you're saying, that there needs to be more regulation, that more people need to be busted, and I'm a huge proponent of it. What we're doing and what we're seeing is that a protocol or a company has to make money in the right way, not from Ponzi-nomics, but actually from fees from producing a good service in some way and adding value. And then from those fees, all tokens, in my opinion, should be in a listed security. And if a company is not able to produce enough revenue to be able to create a security, then they shouldn't have a token in the first place. And all of their financials should be transparent. And if they do that the right way, and they do it, based on, you don't need to reinvent the financial model. It's already created and it has decades of success. Then I think crypto has a chance to move forward. But the current model has to change, and that's what our team is doing, and that's what we're pushing for in the community.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, the SEC tried to open up securities more, like Regulation A and so on. I thought that would actually go places, but Regulation A hasn't really had many takers, and it turns out the stock markets really, really hate Regulation A securities, so that didn't really work out. I don't know, because I remember in the ICO era, there were a whole lot of people who just thought, this is a way for me to raise funds for my business. They weren't trying to run a scam, they wanted to fund their business. Basically, it was a securities offering, and they wanted a way to do that, but they couldn't really make that work. I am not a securities lawyer, particularly a US securities lawyer, but there's got to be a way to do this.
I hope so. I'm curious to see what would happen in the next 5-10 years in this industry.
I think the future is more regulation. Lots more regulation. It's coming.
Yeah, it has to be.
There's more traceability. More traceability is the law now.
We're all tired of getting scammed.
So I'm just over here having fun staying poor,
Did you wish you bought some Bitcoin in 2010 then when you found it?
I have vaguely fantasized about such things, but I don't worry about it too much. Like, I didn't buy Apple stock in 1997. If you bought any Apple stock in 1997, within 5 years you would have been just never working again. But that's because in 97 Apple sucked.
Exactly.
They got Steve Jobs back the next year, and then he took it to the heights. That sort of thing. You can't beat yourself up for not picking the winners. Yeah. Bitcoin was never at any point assured. There's a guy called David Rosenthal. He's a computer scientist, one of the early guys at NVIDIA. And he did a lot of blockchain-like systems, what we would now call blockchain systems, in late 90s, early 2000s. He did one in 2003. It's a system that has a token. And how do you get the token? You use proof of work to create it. Like, it was Bitcoin without Bitcoin. I said this to him and he says, no, it wasn't. It wasn't intended as any such thing, but I still think it was pretty close. But it wasn't the purpose of Bitcoin, and that was the key innovation of Bitcoin, was they created a tool for people who wanted a particular money that worked a particular political way. Money is politics, is always politics. And this is where we got Bitcoin from. So, yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you so much for your input. Jesse and I are going to start picking through the Facebook book soon. Very grateful to have you here. I think that is it for our show today. I want to thank Alex and also Jesse for being here, and honestly for joining us, David, all the way from London. Are you working on a new book now?
Theoretically. I'm working with Amy Castor, another crypto journalist. We're theoretically working on a book about the history of NFTs, and we really, really hate the subject matter because it sucks. But we're also the people who are qualified to write the book. It's horrible. It's a world of just tedious crooks. It's awful. But there's some funny stories. No one cares about the history. They just want to hear dumb crook stories. Funny dumb crooks. That's what people want.
Oh, I want to know the history. You've got to come back on then when that's...
God.
When that's like ready to go.
We've spent the last 4 months not writing the book and just working on nothing except the ongoing crypto meltdown. I've got other things to write, but that's all I've been writing for the last 4 months. It's been terrible. It is as much of a disaster as 2008 was. So many people just wiped out because of over leverage. And people who think, I don't need safeguards. Who needs to worry about this stuff? It'll work out. We're going to get rich.
Yeah. Well, perhaps your work can prevent people from making some pretty bad decisions and betting against things that are complete scams. So
yeah, you can totally make a fortune in crypto, and you can also lose your shirt. So trade carefully.
There we go. Well, thank you again, guys, for joining us at El Podcast. Find us on YouTube and subscribe. And if you were entertained or gained any value and information from these virtual happy hours, please hit the like button. It does help us out. And also you can find us on Spotify. Amazing, David. Thank you. Have a great afternoon. And I hope we have you again when your NFT book comes out.
I would be delighted. Thank you very much.